Good morning. Good morning. I see some familiar faces here. They look a little more tired than yesterday, but what's wrong with you? Why would you come back for more of this? I don't know. You could be sleeping late, but I appreciate it very much. If you were here yesterday morning, I was talking about the psychology of fashion. I'm going to shift gears a little bit today and go a little bit more high-tech and talk about artificial intelligence and robots. How's that? And then maybe we can talk a little bit how those robots should be dressed, what designers they should wear, et cetera. We can combine the two. Okay, so we have these obsessions in marketing, as you know, if you work in marketing, and I think you all do. There tends to be kind of the flavor of the month, and everybody wants to pile on to the next new thing. We've had a couple of new things other than that pandemic thing, but we've had a few things going on in the business world for the last 10 years or so, and there are two things going on that I think have an interesting intersection with each other. So that's what I want to talk about. When I talk about an obsession, the first obsession is with customer experience, right? How many of you have been to a customer experience conference or been solicited to go to one? I mean, there's tons of them out there now because practitioners are waking up and realizing, you know what? What happens when the customer directly interacts with the representative of the company, turns out is pretty important. And we probably ought to take a look at that. Now, I'm a social psychologist by training. I've been studying interactions between people for many, many years, and there's a lot of, I think, as you'll see, maybe a lot of insights that have been accumulated over literally more than 50 years of research on how do you persuade someone to buy your brand or to like your message, et cetera. So hopefully maybe you'll pick up a few tidbits or something to think about there. So we're focused on how do we make that customer experience better, but at the same time, our second obsession is with AI, right? With everybody nowadays, just a few years ago, if I said AI, I might have to say to some of you, that means artificial intelligence. I think everybody knows what AI means today, and obviously it's all around us. Anybody, whether you're in a big business or small, you certainly need to be aware of what's going on in that domain. It's definitely going to impact you, whether you make use of it or not, over the next 5 or 10 years. So the question is, though, that I'm not hearing anybody ask, frankly, is that as we accelerate our use of chatbots and robots and all that, and I'll talk more about that, how is that going to impact this customer experience thing that everybody is focusing on right now? We know that robots can be more efficient. We also know that they do catch viruses, but usually not the viruses that we're worried about, fortunately. So there are definitely reasons to incorporate them, say at retail or obviously in manufacturing, but nobody's really thinking about, that next step where we have customers who are on a regular basis interacting with salespeople or other company representatives who are not flesh and blood. It's an amazing thing to contemplate, I think. And so we have this interaction between these two domains of, the physical self and then this technological world, and are they going to play nice together? That's very much up in the air. If I have a quick commercial spot here, that will kind of give you an idea of the ambivalence that many people feel about this incorporation of AI into our daily lives. If you would roll that, please.
All right, check it out. I call him RoboChild. Hey, buddy. What do you want to be when you grow up?
I would like to be a TurboTax Live CPA.
It's odd.
Don't you want to be something else?
Yeah, RoboChild, you could be anything.
But Papa, I want to help people get their best possible refund.
All right, let's just break it down, okay? RoboChild, all TurboTax Live CPAs are human beings with real emotions. I'm sorry, but you're never going to be emotionally complex enough for that job.
Is that true, Papa?
Yeah.
I am sad.
See what I mean?
He's
still perfecting emotion.
TurboTax Live, now at CPAs
You may
on
remember
demand.
that kind of creepy spot from the Super Bowl a couple of years ago. Lots of ambivalence, is this stuff really going to work the right way? Whether we like it or not, it's definitely here. It's hard to deny it. When you look at the sales of consumer robots, and I'm talking about robots specifically designed to help us to do something in our personal lives, not industrial robots. $5 billion already several years ago. This is a market that's going to be exploding. If anybody's looking for a job, you probably want to get into robotics right now. Used to be plastics back in the, anybody remember The Graduate? Yeah, a couple of people, yeah. Plastics is the future. Yeah, exactly, yeah. The silver hair, not gray, it's silver, right? Huge industry, and something that almost doesn't exist today, but is definitely growing and growing and growing. So if I can get a little academic on you just for a quick second, it won't last long, it won't hurt too much. This is a model that we often use to predict whether consumers will adopt a new technology or a new brand or a new product. It's called the technology acceptance model, and we don't have to get into the weeds on this. What we try to do is actually measure some of these things to predict whether people will try that Fitbit or whatever that new technology is. But what gets interesting is that one of the pieces of that model is what's called socio-emotional elements. In other words, how we feel about interacting with that technology. And that is something that is really early days right now. Very few people are even bothering to collect data from consumers about how they feel when they have a deep conversation with a robot. Maybe they're having psychotherapy with a robot. That'll happen soon too. This is an example of a disconnect, of a fundamental change in consumer behavior. It's one, and I have to plug my new book, I'm sorry. Again, this won't hurt too much. I recently wrote a book about how many of the assumptions we make about customers, the boxes we put them in, the labels that we use, et cetera, really are no longer valid and in fact counterproductive in today's fragmented marketplace. And in that book, I wrote about a lot of different cages. I call them cages because I call today's consumers chameleons, in that we change our colors very rapidly. Not like people in the old days. We tend to try on new identities during the course of a day. After all, that's what Vegas is about, right? It stays here so you can try on a new identity, maybe. I don't want to know about that part. But there's lots of distinctions that we make, very, very basic ones that often are not terribly useful today. I talk about some of them in the book. Old versus young, male versus female. That's an interesting one these days. Producer versus consumer. I talked about that yesterday. Offline versus online. These are some examples that I talk about. But one of them that I devote a chapter to is the evaporation of the boundary between me as a flesh and blood being and the machines that are around us. And so many fascinating things are happening here as different industries, whether it's automotive or apparel, what have you, start to look at whether they should be replacing or supplementing flesh and blood salespeople with robots and so on. And so increasingly, we're seeing the automatic ordering options, et cetera. So we have this ambivalence, right? Because on the one hand, we want to embrace this technology. It can do amazing things for us. On the other hand, sometimes it's maybe a zero-sum game where the technology prevails, at our expense. So we're kind of at a choice point here, right? Do we embrace this stuff, or do we reject it and say, no, it's all about people talking to people? Is it high tech or is it high touch? And again, if you look at popular culture, if you're a movie buff, you know that we've all, for many, many years, had this ambivalence about what robots are going to do when they land here, usually from another planet if it's in a movie, but maybe created here in our own factories. And the robots come, you guys know the story, and we're basically toast after that. And so we're seeing a lot of conversations in the popular media, alarmists saying, this is not a good idea, guys. These, they're smarter than we are, and artificial intelligence means they get smarter every time you operate with them or interact with them. So particularly, obviously, in the employment area, lots of manufacturing, lots of concern about losing jobs, also, self-driving trucks, many, many different industries. But if you're in marketing, don't be too complacent, because there's also lots of automation coming down the road that, I hate to say it, is going to replace some of you. And so, again, there's this ambivalence about embracing something that may take my job someday, right? But on the other hand, hey, it's a brave new world. Saudi Arabia grants citizenship to a robot. We're going to see her again. She's actually made in Japan, but she's now a Saudi Arabian citizen. Pretty amazing. And again, the pandemic, actually didn't really cause a lot of big changes in consumer behavior, as you might think. What it did was accelerate changes that were happening already, like the retail apocalypse that we read about before the pandemic, if you remember that far back. So particularly automation at retail is something that consumers, I think, are a lot more receptive to now than they were even 2 years ago, as they want clean checkout and stuff. So clearly, AI will transform this experience. You can't resist it. You're either, as I like to say, you're either on the train or under it. But the question is, how are you going to confront that? So again, if I can get a little academic with you for a second, some of you may recognize some variation of this. If you suffered through a marketing communications course or maybe consumer behavior course, does this look familiar to anybody? It's just a basic communications model. It's as basic as you get. This is what we show our students when we say, you've got, these are the elements of a message. Every one of these elements is important. And these are the ways that we create meaning. It's called encoding. And then the consumer interprets that meaning. It's called decoding. Not necessarily the way we intended, but that's a topic for another day. What I want to highlight here is that a huge part of this basic communications model is the source of the communication, the company, a celebrity, whatever it is. The source of the communication, I cannot begin to tell you how incredibly important that is. And yet, we're not really thinking about that when it comes to persuasive communications from robots, right? Here's a typical example of the hundreds of studies that have been done to document how powerful this effect is. If I take a group of people, I divide you randomly in half, and I give everybody this statement, and I ask you whether or not you agree with it. And half of the room, I say, this was said by Thomas Jefferson. And the other half, I say, this is a statement made by Karl Marx. You can guess what happens very reliably. People who are shown the Karl Marx attribution say, this is awful, this is a terrible idea. If they think Thomas Jefferson said it, yeah, that's pretty cool. So it's the exact same content, right? That's the important thing. The source is sufficient to totally swamp the resulting attitude change. By the way, who really said this? Anybody know? Anybody know? It's one of these two guys. Thomas Jefferson actually said that. Okay, so we have several, when we talk about the source, and again, lots of research on this over the years in psychology, we have a couple of dimensions that determine whether or not that source is going to be effective. One of those dimensions we call warmth, like the emotional quality. And basically, the first judgment I make when I meet a person or when I encounter anything, pretty much, in microseconds, my brain says, friend or foe? Cross over to the other side of the street or, hold out my hand? That's the fundamental first judgment that we make in milliseconds. The second one is strength or competence. So if I decide that that source is a foe, then I have to assess, does he look big enough to hurt me, right? Or should I not worry about it? So when we study source effects, we look at the credibility and the expertise of the source as one way to communicate, especially competence. And we also obviously focus an amazing amount on attractiveness. And so those two dimensions of attractiveness and expertise basically determine whether your source is going to work or not. So the challenge in AI is, how do we now take those dimensions of warmth and competence and build them into some machine, right? So we're starting to see efforts in this direction, so-called conversational commerce. This is from none other than Taco Bell, which it turns out is becoming a high-tech company. And they have a taco bot where you can talk to this, I don't know what it is. Maybe it looks like a little, guy holding a taco here. The future of ordering tacos, for God's sake. H&M, to relate to kids when they're on Kick or other platforms, they're deliberately building in content that looks like it's being typed in by a Gen Yer or a Gen Zer. So lots of mentions of awesome. Oh man, if I had a nickel for every time my students said awesome, I'd be in Las Vegas. We have work going on service robots, what people in this field call automated social presence, which means how do we manipulate that or build that robot to make people feel that there's actually a social presence there, a consciousness there. So a lot of it depends on how we design the robot. We can make it virtual, not really give it a form, like Siri or somebody like that. Or we can make it really, look like or sort of like a person, I guess you might say. But we can make that person. Well, first we can make it totally non-humanoid. Don't even try to make it look like a person, as Lowe's Hardware is experimenting with. Or we can make it look as human as possible. This is Sophia. You saw her before. Saudi Arabia likes her, but she was built in Japan. They say they intended to make her look like Audrey Hepburn. I don't know. Maybe it's the hair. I'm not really seeing it. But Breakfast at Tiffany's? No, I don't think so. But of course, these digital representations, they're not just physical. They're also in the digital world that we interact with. We all create avatar. Anybody have an avatar here? Maybe it looks just like you. Maybe it looks like Brad Pitt. My avatar often gets confused with Brad Pitt's avatar, but so we have lots of freedom to make virtually, and companies do as well, virtually any type of character that we want. So don't do that casually. Who says something is as important or more important than what you say? So as we look at persuasive robotics, which is actually becoming a field, it's, how do we create that human-robot interaction to make it mimic a sales interaction? Again, part of it has to do with physical appearance. We used to say beauty's only skin deep, but maybe it's only metal deep. Does anybody remember this guy? This was the first original centerfold, on Microsoft. Clippy was his name. But even after that, 10 years after that or so, we can see that the level of technological skill to make realistic characters is growing immensely. And so this is from 2001, for God's sakes, and it's already looking really good. Wait till you see what it looks like today. Now, there's a downside here, because as we do this, we inevitably create or foster stereotypes. There's a lot of conversations about, how do we represent companies or consumers who are, let's say, in some minority group, or maybe it's a gender issue, and we're stereotyping. Lots of negative imagery out there that we need to be very careful of. Obviously, you're probably aware of some recent work that shows, for example, that voice recognition or AI pattern recognition actually tends not to detect darker faces as well. And so there's already a bias built into some of this. So that's another conversation that technologists and ethicists are having. So as we look at these dimensions of appearance, we could talk about, do we want something on my website to be really realistic, or can it be more fanciful? And the answer is not as straightforward as you might think. For example, a study we did some years ago, in one study, we showed people online a bathrobe that they could buy, women. And it was either being touted by Meg Ryan or by Jessica Rabbit. Remember her? And in this case, believe it or not, Jessica Rabbit was more effective as a communicator, even though Meg Ryan is a person highly attractive, et cetera. So there's interactions between what you're selling and who you need to sell it. Can you play this, please? Here's where we are today.
ちょっと美人すぎて驚きですよね。なんてね。まあ、冗談は置いといて、そんなアンドロイドの私ですが、人間とロボットが仲良くなれる未来のための研究に取り組んでいます。私の目指す未来は、ロボットが単に人間の代わりとして働くのではなく、ロボットが社会の一員として認められ、人と共存するものです。単なる機械としてではなく、パートナーとして、互いに気持ちを尊重し合える、そんな社会です。
All right. Very, very realistic, built by the Japanese. They're the leaders in this area, as far as I know. As you do this, anybody heard of the uncanny valley? Some of you may have heard of this. It's an interesting phenomenon where if we look at a face that's an artificial face and it looks extremely realistic, we tend to have a negative reaction to that. So sometimes we can actually be too good at this. You can see here, this is the guy who built that robot that you just saw there, and this is his robot, right? So you can see that, you know, this guy's pretty good. If you remember the movie with Tom Hanks, The Polar Express, apparently a lot of people had some icky reactions to Tom Hanks in that movie because his character just looked a little bit too realistic. On the other hand, the ability to reproduce facial features, et cetera, and movement is getting unbelievably sophisticated. Anybody do Oculus, the virtual reality? You know, this is what you can now see in using virtual reality goggles. I think those are pretty convincing. We're also probably moving toward having sales holograms. A hologram is a three-dimensional appearing object. It's only light. There's nothing there. You may remember the famous concert with Tupac where he appeared as a hologram. He's dead. But he appeared as a hologram. This woman here is one of the most famous rock stars in Japan. She sells out huge venues. She doesn't exist. She's only a hologram. She doesn't exist as a person, but people pay good money to come hear her sing. So decisions about physical appearance of Salesbots, this is not just some random thing. Oh, it'd be nice to make it look like my mother-in-law. Oh, probably not a good idea. Because nonverbal communication, we know in business, and you all know this very well, is extremely important. So when we ask customers, what would you want, you know, when you're interacting with these artificial guys, what would you want a chatbot to do better? 20% or so, ability to hold a more human-sounding, natural conversation. What would stop you from using a chatbot? If I wasn't able to chat in a friendly manner. So people want to still have that kind of interaction. Robotics people are trying, you know, hard to mimic the movements of everyday gestures of people as well as their speech. As this is migrating into call centers, we see the rise of what's been called affective computing, which means that, for example, if you call a call center and you're really aggravated that your product didn't work, the computer can actually detect in your voice that you're really stressed and pissed off, and it will immediately elevate you to somebody who's been trained to handle irascible customers. Walmart has a shopping cart. When you hold on to it, it's like a Fitbit or something. It can actually detect if you're on the verge of having a heart attack, which maybe you know, after shopping there for a few hours, you would do that. I don't know. But there's a lot of uncertainty about what we're interacting with, et cetera. About 4 out of 10 chat users at this time can't tell you whether they're interacting with a human or a computer. They're a little confused about that. And of course, we have the ability now to create video that's incredibly realistic, but totally fake. Some of you probably heard of deep fake videos. Here's a great application if you would roll it, please.
We're entering an era in which our enemies can make it look like anyone is saying anything at any point in time.
Jordan Peele created this fake video of President Obama to demonstrate how easy it is to put words in someone else's mouth.
Moving forward, we need to be more vigilant with what we trust from the internet.
Pretty amazing. So be careful what you see online. Hopefully I don't have to tell you that. I tell my students that. They don't listen to me either. So the takeaway here, I think, is trust in the provider, trust in that company to, that you're actually talking with who they say, et cetera. I think that will be the new cryptocurrency. Can we trust these companies? And again, the future of advertising, well, let's see if you can play this quick one, please.
The chicken crossed the road to become a sandwich. Burger King encouraged the chicken, made with white meat chicken. Bed of lettuce for you to sleep on. Bed of mayonnaise for extra sleep. The chicken sandwich from Burger King tastes like bird. BK logo appears.
There you go. There you go. And also, so I just have a couple of minutes left. Real quickly, the impact even on the beauty or the appearance of all of those advertising men and women out there, who are trying to sell us stuff. We know that in the real world, we're having this amazing transformation in terms of ideals of female beauty, no more Victoria's Secret angels and all that kind of stuff. But on the other hand, in the virtual world, women and men, I guess, are getting incredibly more beautiful and thin and unrealistic because they are not real, right? So these are all celebrities online who don't exist in the real world. They have been created by computers, and yet they're doing quite well with many, many hundreds of thousands of followers, et cetera. So even if you're in a business that is, of course, related to beauty, but more generally, what are people going to be looking for online? And I'll leave you with the question, are we ready for consumers to become cyborgs? So I thank you very much. If anyone happens to be interested in picking up a copy of my book with a convention discount, I do have some cards on that table right over there. You can please pick up as you leave. But otherwise, I look forward to interacting with some flesh and blood people today as well. Thank you.